Hi, everyone. This is Kirsten Verklas with NASEO. Thank you for joining us for the Wind Energy Technologies Office webinar. We will begin shortly. Please stand by. Hi, everyone. This is Kirsten Verklas, Program Director for Electricity at the National Association of Energy Officials, NASEO. Welcome to the Electricity Committee webinar with the DOE Wind Energy Technologies Office. Before we get started, I just wanted to touch on a few housekeeping items. All the attendees are in listen-only mode, so you're muted. If you would like to ask questions, we will take question and answers at the end of the webinar. You can ask the questions in the chat box, and we will then get to the questions at the end of the webinar. With that, I would like to introduce Dina Dennis. She's the Senior Manager for Government and External Relations at the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, and she's the affiliate co-chair of NASEO's Electricity Committee. And Ms. Dennis will moderate, and she will also introduce our speakers from the DOE Wind Office. Over to you, Dina.
Thank you, Kirsten, and good afternoon and good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited for our distinguished panel of presenters today from the DOE Wind Energy Technology Office. Right now, I'm going to introduce WETO's Director, Dr. Robert Marley. And Dr. Marley and his team will provide an overview on the office's research priorities, as well as partnerships with national labs, states, and industry to advance development of off and onshore wind in the United States. We'll look forward to understanding, the office is excited to understand and hear from the states regarding your perspectives on research and development priorities and understanding what states see as top challenges and opportunities in supporting wind development. So that being said, Dr. Bob Marley is the director of the Wind Energy Technologies Office. Over the course of his public service career, Dr. Marley has held numerous leadership positions within DOE and with the US Navy. He has worked in national security, science, energy research, technology development, and policy and international affairs. Before coming to EERE, he was the director of DOE's Office of International Science and Technology Cooperation from 2010 to 2018, where he worked with more than 40 countries. He also served as the founding director of the US-China Clean Energy Research Center, a collaborative platform for joint research for the benefit of both countries. 3 previous times, Dr. Marley has worked in various leadership capacities at EERE. He started his federal service as a GS-3 engineering aide at the Weapons System Division in the Naval Air Test Center at Patuxent River, Maryland. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Marley, and he will also introduce the rest of his team. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. And yeah, it's been a long journey since GS3. And good afternoon to all of you. As Deanna said, my name is Bob Marley, and I'm the director of the Wind Energy Technologies Office at DOE. And thank you very much to NASEO for providing this opportunity for us to give an overview of our research and development programs in wind energy and what we're doing, hopefully, to benefit the wind industry and its users broadly, and in particular, how we're helping the states utilize and deploy wind. On the next slide, I would like to just show the faces of our briefers today. We have, I think Jim Algram is maybe occupied on some other conference calls today, but we have Mike Derby and Jocelyn Brown, Saraceno, Patrick Gilman, and Jian Fu, and myself. We have only about 10 slides, and we have plenty of time on the allocation of the agenda. And I will start with an overview on 2 or 3 slides, and then we'll call on the individuals here to basically talk about their respective program management responsibilities. So maybe on the next slide, please. Thank you. So let me just refer to my notes here. Yeah, okay. So looking at the slide is that, you know, I have to say at the very beginning that DOE's mission is to support research and innovation in technically challenging areas. We try not to supplant or displace work that should be done by the private sector, leaving that to the businesses and the investors and others. But we too try to work on things that are particularly challenging, and we often think that some of the stuff that we worked on in the past has really come to the fore. Here you see 2 charts at the top. Is that the wind energy resource we've known for a long time, and DOE started this chart maybe 30 years ago or more, is really vast. The wind resources in the United States are perhaps as much as 10 times all the electricity that's used in the country. And over on the right-hand side, we have a chart courtesy of the American Wind Energy Association, populated with red dots. And the red dots indicate just some of the more than 530 manufacturing and economic centers that are providing wind technology in the supply chain. There are not 530 dots on that chart, I don't believe, but that is a lot. You'll notice that it also shows kind of the concentration of where wind is, particularly in some of the dark blue areas, and it's a little bit light in the southeast, but we're working on that with tall towers. So 30 years ago, I think capturing all of that wind resource was an ideal, but a little bit far out of reach. The technologies really were not good enough, and the costs were really too high, except in rather unique situations. And we've really come an awful long way to what it is today. Is that I don't think I have to remind this audience, particularly in the States, that wind energy now is the #1 renewable energy source of electric power in the United States. Electric power now is accounting for 7% produced by wind compared to all the electricity that's used. And that has exceeded now all of the power from the hydroelectric dams. So wind is really coming on strong, and it's been growing over the last 2 decades or so at about 15% per year. So all of these things are really good news stories, and so the question really remains is that, you know, what is there more to do? And from DOE's perspective, we really see that there's some very important key challenges that remain if wind energy is going to continue to grow and realize its full potential, which we hopefully will be much more than just 7%. It could be much higher than that. And these are them at the bottom of the slide there, is that we focused on the word unsubsidized. Unsubsidized costs are still too high for wind in a lot of the applications that would be available in the future. And there are many technical challenges remain, especially as the towers get bigger and bigger, and some of them move offshore. You can see on the map above, there are an awful lot of really deep blue resources just off the coasts. everywhere you look, there are environmental and siting challenges. I don't think I have to remind the states of what these are, including community impacts. And we really need to work on solutions that are better than the ones that we have today, even though we've met an awful lot of the concerns, is that as we grow, there'll be even more. And then finally, as we mentioned, as the power gets bigger and bigger as a percentage or share of the total grid, integration of large-scale wind power into the grid really presents a number of complexities that require some rather sophisticated technical challenges. And Deanna's, I'm sure, aware of those coming from EPRI. So let's move on to the next slide then, please. So you'll forgive me, or at least give me your forbearance if I brag about DOE a little bit and its history as we go along. We're going to call out as we talk about what we're doing, some of the contributions and accomplishments that we've made in the past. But here are a number of them: 155 DOE-funded wind patents, with 20 more that are pending. And in the past, we were the first ones to demonstrate really sizable megawatt scale class machines. Is that these were very risky for some of the businesses to undertake, and we showed that through the demonstrations that they would work and build confidence in the investors that if you build them, they'll work and they'll perform. We did a lot of work on airfoil designs, blades, bigger and bigger. Of course, this demands advances in materials, and then you'll hear also about some rather sophisticated work we're doing in aerospace arenas, atmospheric physics, optimizing how wind flows not just through a turbine but through an entire farm of turbines, an array, and how one optimizes the plant. You can see over here on the right-hand side that just in the last 10 years, from 2010, there's been a lot of cost reduction in land-based and offshore. We've gone from 8 cents per kilowatt hour down to under 4, but we still think that we need to go much further if we're going to be competitive without subsidies. So our target is 2 cents. Over there on the offshore side is that we see we've gone from 25 cents down to under 10. So these are tremendous advances in just a short period of time. But still, is that even 8, 9, 10 cents a kilowatt hour offshore is really too expensive, not that competitive. And we want to get down to 5 cents. So in both these cases, we're basically aiming for another 50% cost reduction in the cost of power. And we think if the subsidies were to come off or be phased out, as they seem to be intended to be through legislation, wind will still be very competitive and will continue to grow. In the distributed wind, which is a smaller scale, kind of between the kilowatt and the megawatt scale turbines, these are individual turbines or maybe clusters of turbines that are not necessarily in the platform of a utility scale. We want to continue to work with the manufacturers of these type of turbines to get their costs down to 7 cents on a kilowatt scale and 4 cents. And hopefully some of these things will be well matched to rural cooperatives and things like that. So next slide, please. And I think this is one of the last slides that I'll be talking about in the overview, and we'll get into some of the details on the programs. But I would like to just give an overview here of how our program is organized. These are the line items that we see coming out of the congressional appropriations of the House Energy and Water Committees. On the Senate and House side is that in the language, they basically give us our allocations in terms of offshore wind. And you see a picture there of a number of varieties of ways to do that, either fixed bottom or floating. Land-based, a lot more to do there, and we'll talk about that. Distributed wind, a lot of potential that we're hoping to realize. Systems integration, which is, I mentioned the grid, but it's really a little bit more than just the wind. As you'll hear from Gian a little bit later, it really involves working with hybrid systems, including solar and distributed energy resources of buildings, storage, and how all of that melds into a smoothly functioning and reliable and resilient grid. And then, of course, data modeling analysis is that we have to have the data, not just on what's happening, but on the technology trends and emerging developments. And the analysis that we do on that really informs how we set our top line priorities. Our top line priorities in kind of its simplest form are these four. Really is that the one that transcends all of the different technologies is aggressive cost reduction. As you pursue economies of scale, you're going to, of course, get taller and bigger and heavier, and really it becomes kind of exponentially more important to scale these things properly and drive toward lighter weight. And this is particularly important if you're going off sea or if you're trying to support something on a floating platform. As I mentioned earlier, is that the environmental and siting challenges really are prevalent in almost every site, and we need to work on understanding behavior of our interactions with wildlife, what kind of interference we have with radar, what kind of things we have to do to adapt to community concerns. And we're trying to be on top of all those things, providing the information and the technology that can point to solutions. And finally, we're moving from just take our wind on the grid to actually becoming a kind of a collaborator and a partner with trying to create grid resiliency, performance by providing services, cybersecurity, as I mentioned, in the hybrid systems. And over there on the infrared photograph of the wind turbine, you can see a bird that's flying. That turbine's quite large, so that bird is probably quite large. I'm guessing it might be an eagle, but through technology that DOE has invented with its collaborators, we actually can identify through the signals that we get what kind of species they are and how close they are to the turbines. And this can inform real-time operation as well as longer-term solutions about deterrence. So on the next slide, please. So on offshore wind is that this is actually one of the bigger parts of our program. Our overall program is in round numbers, roughly $100 million right now of research and development money from the Congress, and about half of that is devoted to this, what I call a new frontier, very challenging offshore. I know that all the states that are on the line today, some of you may or may not have offshore access or even lakes that are large enough to support wind, but it is a major thrust of our program. A lot of the things that we do offshore, because it's a very challenging goal, actually spill over with benefits for land-based wind as well. And so, although, the Europeans have been ahead of us on offshore wind here for 10 years or more, and we can learn from them. They have a lot of experience, but we have a lot of things that are unique, I think, to U.S. waters, including the fact that some of our bottoms are very soft sediment and not quite suitable for pounding things in. We have deep water, particularly in the West Coast, where the shelf just drops off almost immediately. So you're talking about floating, not fixed bottom. Europe, at least Northern Europe, they don't seem to have the hurricanes or the really severe weather that we do, confronting our shores. And we have surface water built up in areas like the Great Lakes, freshwater areas, etc. And we have to do a lot more resource assessments. So I'll let Mike Derby and Jocelyn. Mike is really focusing on a lot of the wind technology, and Jocelyn is on the environmental and siting areas. Take it from here and talk about some of the stuff that we're showing on the slide and point to maybe some of our recent accomplishments. So, Mike, if you're on, may I call on you?
Thanks, Bob. My name's Mike Derby. I'm the program manager for technology development that covers distributed wind, land-based wind, and offshore wind. And as Bob was saying, there's a lot of technology development that needs to happen in offshore wind in order for it to be cost effective in the U.S. And one of the things that we're really concentrating on is what are those unique U.S. aspects that are challenges for us. There's broad experience in Europe installing and operating offshore wind plants, and we fully expect that the industry is going to leverage that knowledge in the U.S. installations. So what we want to focus on is those things that are different between Europe and the U.S., and that includes extreme weather like hurricanes, Some of the subsea soil conditions are softer here than they are in Europe, and we have a lot of our resource located in deep waters. So within the fixed bottom R&D priorities, we're focusing a lot on wind resource characterization. There's a lot of data that's been collected by NOAA with buoys, but that data is all measured at a 10-meter height. That was interesting. In case, within floating offshore, we're looking at how we're going to develop offshore floating wind platforms. There's a lot of different designs out there today, and there's no clear winners at the moment. We're helping to develop some of the design tools that are going to be required to evaluate those systems. And cross-cutting R&D includes a lot of overlap with the land-based work. Some of the things that we need for offshore turbines equally apply to land-based turbines. And that includes all the manufacturing techniques, and ultra-large, ultra-lightweight turbines are going to cross over. One of the things I'd like to highlight is our efforts in the atmospheric science and resource characterization. So we know enough that we don't have a good capability to model the winds at hub height offshore. The atmospheric boundary layer doesn't behave the same offshore as it does over land. And we have a real hard time forecasting hub height winds, low-level jets, and the atmospheric stability offshore. So we're supporting multiple efforts to try to address some of these gaps. Through the National Offshore Wind R&D Consortium that DOE supports, we've got 3 pending awards that will help address some of this. We currently have a funding opportunity open for a $10 million offshore resource science campaign where we'd like to measure offshore winds for up to a year and try to improve our weather forecasting models. DOE has 2 LiDAR buoys that we've deployed previously off the coast of Virginia in 2015 and once off of New Jersey in 2016. We've recently upgraded and validated new LiDARs on these buoys, and we're planning to deploy these with BOEM in California later this year. These buoys are also available in a loan program. They're available for any entity to use for their own research campaigns. Just a couple other things I wanted to note. We've recently awarded $7 million to look at next generation lightweight generators. And we're funding 6 national level test facilities, including major upgrades to the Wind Technology Testing Center in Charlestown, Massachusetts, and at the Clemson University dynamometer facilities. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jocelyn to talk about the environmental impacts.
Great, thanks, Mike. So I'm Jocelyn Brown-Saracino. I'm the program manager for the Wind Office's Environmental Siting and Workforce Development Program. And we have been doing work in the offshore arena with respect to addressing environmental and siting challenges for about the last decade. Currently within our environmental portfolio, we're really working to develop technical solutions to help unlock the development of offshore wind in US waters. And what that portfolio looks like is both support of data collection efforts to really help us understand what unique impacts will be in US waters in order to help facilitate siting and permitting of future projects, and also help inform the design of mitigation solutions where those solutions prove necessary. We also have a large body of work surrounding really trying to promote knowledge transfer out of Europe, make sure that there's information sharing, robust information sharing going on to help us really understand what the state of the science is with regards to environmental impacts of offshore wind and how to best address those challenges. DOE supports the TETHIS website, which is a database of research on both land-based and offshore wind environmental topics. That website also hosts a number of different resources, including webinars on these topics, information with respect to upcoming events, and other resources germane to environmental research around wind energy. We are also leading through our national labs a new national initiative to really synthesize the state of the science with respect to what we understand about environmental impacts of wind energy, and then develop some regional research priorities for the future with respect to this research area. But the largest part of our portfolio currently is really around both developing monitoring solutions where we don't have tools that already exist, and then also developing tools to minimize impact. And in this space currently, we are funding the development and validation of a suite of different tools that will allow us to assess collision risk for birds and bats at offshore wind farms. And then we're also developing tools to help us monitor and minimize marine mammal exposure to noise in the offshore environment. We also have a body of work that's really focused on ensuring that communities, coastal communities, have access to information on the costs and benefits of offshore wind development. And we house a lot of that information currently through our Wind Exchange program. And so that's a great resource for stakeholders who might be considering the relative attributes of wind development in their area. And then finally, the DOE, in concert with our national labs, leads national efforts to assess and then establish solutions to radar, wind turbine interference with radar systems. And my colleague Patrick Gilman will be talking about that a little in greater depth when we talk about our land-based research portfolio, but we are also actively, I just want to point out that we're actively doing work in this area for offshore wind as well as land-based wind. And with that, Bob, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Mike. So turning now to, this is offshore wind, which is our first of 5 pillars, and our second pillar is land-based wind. And here it's interesting, you know, as a director of the wind office, when I'm out in public, people say, gosh, land-based wind is the main event in the U.S. success story of wind energy. So why is DOE R&D still focusing on land-based wind? And it is certainly a success story. There's no doubt about it, as pointed out on some of those charts earlier. And in some of the states, as you know, is that Iowa in particular and others, is that we're well into double digits of power production on an annual basis. And in some cases, I think in the Southwest Power Pool here recently, land-based wind hit over 70% of all the power on the grid at the time. So, you know, there is a success story. But as I mentioned earlier, is that we set our ambitions high at DOE, and we're looking for, you know, how to press the envelope even further. And we really want wind to compete with all of the options that are bound to try to compete with it, including low-price natural gas and other things, without the policy incentives. There's no doubt about it that we are very appreciative of what the states have done with its renewable energy policies and encouragements and incentives. This has certainly carried wind into the success field, but we want them to compete even better, even without the incentives should they go away. And we feel it's important to reduce these costs even more. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, is that there are always these environmental and siting constraints. So shifting over to land-based wind now is that what I'd like to do is call again on Mike and Jocelyn and perhaps some others that can address some of the barriers to future deployment in the land-based area. So, Mike.
Thank you, Bob. So DOE's priorities for R&D in land-based wind focus on two primary areas, tall wind and wind plant optimization. So regarding tall wind, scaling to the larger turbines are one of the single most important drivers to achieving cost reductions. This requires taller towers, bigger rotors, and lightweight drivetrains. So we're looking at how are we going to increase those hub heights? How do you enable these larger drivetrains and larger rotor systems, more flexible rotors? And that's going to require innovations in manufacturing, automation, logistical solutions for the big components. And the other area for greatest impact is the optimization of wind plant performance. You can kind of think of this as improving our fuel efficiency and the reliability of our turbines. Within the wind plant optimization, we look at new controls to reduce the wake effects from one turbine on another turbine, which has the ability to increase plant performance. We also look at those controls to reduce the loads and stresses and try to extend the useful life of turbines. And last, but certainly not least, we're looking at solutions for the end of life. How are we going to recycle and repurpose the materials that are in a wind turbine for reuse? Our tall wind effort is nominally targeting a 5 megawatt class turbine with 100 meter long blades on a 140 meter tall tower. And we're really looking again to address what are those US unique challenges to implementing that size machine. There's already machines on the market in that size class, but you don't see those deployed in the US right now. And so that's really what we're focused on, is trying to make those cost effective in the US. Taller wind turbines enable access to much better wind resources, which can open up areas of the country that are currently uneconomical for wind. Take a look at the Southeast, where we don't see any wind turbines deployed today. As you get up to higher elevations, the winds are actually quite good in that area of the country. So if we can enable turbines that are cost effective at these 140 meter hub heights, you potentially could see turbine deployments in those states. It could become an option. The other thing we're looking for is to increase plant capacity factors. The better wind resource makes any given turbine have a higher plant capacity factor. One of the primary challenges is the transportation and installation of these very large components. Towers need to have broader bases, and right now we're constrained by being able to transport those under bridges and so forth. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at demonstration projects for 140 meter tall towers. We have two. One is with Keystone Engineering, and they're doing a demonstration for on-site fabrication of spiral welded steel towers. And the other one we're running right now is with General Electric Corporation, who are looking at a 3D printed concrete base that's then topped with a standard steel tower that can be transported. Both of these projects are also intending to demonstrate tower climbing cranes instead of conventional crawler cranes. You know, one of the issues is how do you get the components on top of these really tall towers with conventional cranes? So they're looking for innovations in that space. Another program we're running is the Big Adaptive Rotor program, which is looking at what technology innovations might enable single piece 100 meter long blades to be transported by rail. Current technology blades, it's not feasible. This is going to require thinner, more flexible blades, and that innovation is probably going to require new materials for the blades. It's going to require new controls in order to alleviate any flutter. And it may potentially require new turbine configurations to make sure these flexible blades will not hit the tower as it's operating. So that may mean a downwind turbine. We're currently also running a lightweight generator program that's trying to reduce generator weight by at least 35%. So all these technology innovations are aimed at enabling tall wind that has benefits not only in the southeast, but anywhere that a wind turbine can be installed. Getting better access to higher quality winds could lead to cost of energy improvements. Jocelyn?
Great, thanks, Mike. So as with the offshore wind portfolio, I'm going to be talking a bit about the work that we're doing to address environmental and siting challenges pertaining to land-based wind. And our overarching areas of work are somewhat parallel to the work that we're doing in the offshore space. We're focused on addressing environmental challenges, working to assess and provide information on community impacts of wind, and then also working to address radar interference challenges. But the details of our portfolios look different between our offshore wind and land-based wind portfolio. In our environmental work area, we are, as with offshore wind, working to develop technical solutions and have been leading work in this space for the last 3 decades. And we have a strategy here that's really focused on both evaluating impacts, but then also working to develop mitigation solutions for bats, eagles, and for grouse species. With respect to impacts on bat species, DOE through our national laboratories leads the Bats and Wind Energy Cooperative, which is a multi-sectoral group working to make sure that we're collectively working to identify solutions to impacts of wind energy development on bats. And then we also have a large portfolio of work focused on really trying to minimize impacts of wind turbines on bats, ranging from a suite of ongoing and past efforts to both develop, refine, and validate ultrasonic deterrent systems for bats. And some of the systems that are just starting to emerge commercially on the markets have their roots, at least in part, in DOE funding and support from their outset. We also have a portfolio of work focused on trying to make curtailment regimes established to try to minimize bat impacts at wind farms more refined. This is commonly referred to as smart curtailment, and we've got a portfolio of 4 different projects that are working to really try to refine and reduce the amount of energy that's lost while ensuring that bats continue to be protected at wind farms. We also have a portfolio of work, as I mentioned, focused on really trying to both better model risk to eagles at wind farms, but then also to really help us reduce impacts and make sure that wind energy developers, resource agencies alike have access to tools, validated tools to really help ensure that eagles are kept safe around wind turbines. Currently, a couple projects of note in that space. We're sponsoring multi-site, multi-year validation efforts of both the DT Bird system, which is a coupled camera and acoustic deterrent system, and the Identiflight system, which is a high definition 3D camera system that's coupled with an informed curtailment mechanism, both designed to minimize risk to eagles at turbines. And then finally, with respect to grouse, we're currently working with both our national labs and the American Wind Wildlife Institute to assess what the state of the science is with respect to impacts of wind energy on grouse and assess what questions remain to be answered in that area. We support work surrounding social science, evaluating the community impacts of wind. Several years ago now, we funded through our Lawrence Berkeley National Lab the largest ever assessment of how communities and folks who live around wind turbines perceive wind energy development, and research to better understand the variables that affect that relationship. And then, as with offshore wind, our Wind Exchange program provides a suite of resources for wind energy communities and decision makers weighing wind energy development choices, including resources like siting guides, wind resource maps, and a host of other informational resources. And with that, I'm gonna pass the virtual microphone over to my colleague Patrick Gilman, who's going to be talking about the work that we're doing to establish solutions around wind turbine interference on radar systems.
All right, thank you, Jocelyn. So my name is Patrick Gilman, and I lead our work in reducing wind turbine radar interference mitigation. This is an area that has been a significant challenge for wind deployment in a number of areas of the country. And there's been a fair bit of state policy action actually around managing the conflicts between wind development and military equities more broadly that the radar issue sort of fits within. The primary means through which we do that is with an interagency working group called the Wind Turbine Radar Interference Mitigation Working Group, which is governed by an MOU between us, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, NOAA, and the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Interior. And we work collaboratively on both understanding better the impacts of wind turbine development on radars, as well as developing mitigation solutions to help ensure that wind development can coexist with radar emissions. So one recent example of work that we've done collaboratively is we just finished a campaign based out of Travis Air Force Base in California, looking at how wind developers or agencies could deploy infill or gap filler radars to supplement coverage over wind farms where primary air traffic control radars have been corrupted. And that is now leading to a process where the FAA is going to take that and enable certification of those systems to be deployed in operation. So making slow and steady progress on that front. This is not just an issue for land-based wind, it's also an issue for offshore. We're in the midst of a webinar series aimed at establishing research priorities for wind turbine radar interference mitigation. And if folks want to follow up after the webinar, I'd be happy to send the invite to that webinar series along. And with that, I'll pass it back to Bob.
I have to remind myself to take myself off mute in these transitions. Thank you, Mike, Jocelyn, and Patrick. Let's go on now to our third pillar out of 5. And this is what we call distributed wind. It used to be, I think, called at one time maybe smaller wind, but this is wind that's in the kilowatt scale all the way up to megawatt. A megawatt is certainly not small. It's just that it's maybe not deployed with hundreds of turbines in one place. It may be just 3, 4, 5, or 6 turbines in an area, and maybe connected to a rural cooperative grid. But right now, distributed wind only has about 1 gigawatt of installed capacity in the United States, but it really has a lot of significant untapped potential. Mostly in local grid applications, maybe in some rural areas, industrial sites, and the technology itself has a significant potential for export to many countries that have emerging needs for power in remote areas. So let me ask Patrick to come back with a different hat on now. He is also the head of our distributed wind program, in addition to some of the things you heard him talk about already. So Patrick, take it away.
Thanks, Bob. So I'll highlight a couple things in our R&D related to distributed wind. As Bob mentioned, and I'll just clarify real quick, the key distinction here is power that's used close to the point of production, either on site. So you imagine a turbine here in the picture on the upper right, deployed at a factory to offset on-site electricity use, or feeding into a small distribution feeder for local use, say on a rural utility grid. There's a couple of significant challenges standing in the way of distributed wind at all scales. First, particularly as you get into the sort of kilowatt scale machines, hardware costs have not fallen to the same extent that they have in the utility scale wind space. and particularly when you get into the smaller turbines, have not fallen as quickly as small-scale solar photovoltaics. And so that's been a significant challenge for this part of the market, affecting both the smaller turbines and the larger turbines. Are significant challenges associated with development and so-called soft costs. It actually is not that much more difficult in most places of the country to permit a large wind farm than it is to permit a single wind turbine. And so that, as you can imagine, creates challenges for projects that are going to deliver a lot less power. You're spreading those costs over a lot less, you're offsetting that with a lot less revenue. And so to address those challenges, we have a number of R&D priorities. First, even if distributed wind is not competitive right now with solar PV or with utility scale generation, we think that there are significant opportunities for the integration of these technologies in hybrid applications with PV, with storage, to help offset on-site energy loads, as well as to help provide resilience and other services. And we're standing up a suite of testing capabilities at our national labs right now to help us evaluate these kinds of opportunities. As you might imagine, there's lots of places in the country where the wind blows hard during the night, and when the sun is not shining, and the sun is shining during the day when the wind is not blowing. So there's lots of complementary potential there that we're exploring through these hybrid R&D programs. Second, as I mentioned, at the kilowatt scale in particular, costs have not fallen to the extent that they have in the solar PV market. And so we have a program called the Competitiveness Improvement Projects, run out of our National Renewable Energy Lab, that enters into partnering agreements with small wind turbine manufacturers to help them with research and development to lower their costs of energy. And just one example here on the right, on the lower right, we've worked with a manufacturer called Bergy Wind, which is the oldest continuously operating wind turbine manufacturer in the United States. Over the course of a couple of different CIP awards, they've been able to reduce the cost of energy from their flagship model from roughly 25 cents a kilowatt hour, which is not competitive with solar PV, down to 12 cents a kilowatt hour for this 15 kilowatt machine that is at a residential scale competitive in many places with solar PV. We also have a number of projects that are just ramping up right now under an initiative called Wind Innovations for Rural Economic Development, or WIRED, that is aimed at helping rural utilities with tools like distribution system planning and operations and controls, as well as with some more kind of soft cost focused activities aimed at standardizing project development and permitting. We have a number of projects that are standing up under that initiative right now that should be active going into the next year. And with that, I will hand it back to Bob to talk about introduce our grid program.
Thank you, Patrick. So now let's move on to our pillar number 4, which is, we call it systems integration. And I'll just mention that DOE has been active in supporting wind integration and related technology R&D for more than 25 years. If you think back, if some of you can remember back to that point, it was really difficult even to integrate a small amount of wind, like 1%, into the utility grid. That was a challenge. And now, of course, we're seeing states that are seeing 30 or 40% wind share averaged over a year being integrated in the grid, and occasions more than that. So we're now dealing with the idea of taking a very dominant input to the grid and trying to figure out holistic approaches to how these things can be smoothly integrated in a systems way. It's a priority for DOE, not just for the wind program, but for the solar program, for the energy storage, for the grid office, et cetera. So all parts of DOE are now interested in how to deal with this in an integrated, holistic way. And we have quite an interesting laboratory platform out in Colorado with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that's helping us pave the way on that. So let me call on the program manager for systems and grid integration, Jian Fu. Jian?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, my name is Jian Fu. I'm the system integration lead for Wind Office. Thanks, Bob, for the introduction. And Bob has just mentioned the energy system has been doing pretty well integrating low to medium amount of wind. However, integration of high level of wind faces new challenges, especially when energy system itself is undergoing transformation from a centrally controlled synchronous generator dominant system to systems with more distributed, evolving mixed generation resources and more interdependencies on other sectors. So we boiled down the challenges for future wind integration to three prominent ones. The first one comes from the nature of wind itself. Wind is inherently variable and uncertain, which means there is no perfect forecast for wind. Although system operators nowadays are able to operate system with moderate amount of wind, having increasing level of wind together with growing solar energy in the system demands more system flexibility. The flexibility that are provided by conventional generators may not be sufficient in the near future. It is expected for flexibility to come from a variety of resources, including wind, distributed energy resources, demand-side responses, transmission grid, and emerging technologies such as energy storage and the hybridization of multiple technologies. The second challenge roots from the way how wind is connected to the energy system. Different from conventional synchronous generators, wind generators are connected through primarily through power electronic devices such as converters or inverters. They are asynchronous. System operation and planning that are designed to have synchronous generators to provide frequency and voltage support are facing challenges such as lack of inertia, diminishing short circuit current, voltage oscillation, to name a few. Those challenges, if not addressed well, may lead to a system instability under distress conditions. The third challenge is cybersecurity. As digitalization is pervasive in how wind is connected, communicated, and controlled, it increases wind system vulnerability for cyber attacks. So our R&D priorities are trying to address those challenges. The first one is in direct contribute to DOE's energy storage grant challenge. We are looking into the hybridization of wind with energy storage, such as batteries, ultra caps, and hydrogen storage and other technologies as an option to address growing demand for system flexibility. We will continue to enable and refine wind's capability to provide great services. WITO has invested in active power control of wind for quite a few years, and it led to a successful demonstration last fall at Evergreen Wind Plant near California. The demonstration, as seen from the lower right graphic, that is the report of the project, is operation of California ISO, Evergreen GE, and the National Renewable Energy Lab. It validated wind's capability to follow control signals from grid operators to provide much needed grid reliability support. The next phase of wind control R&D, we are looking into wind controls to support grid stability, from understanding the grid stability with large fleet of inverter-based resources to enable grid forming control of wind. We will also look into co-optimized wind control to provide stackable, predictable grid services, and how to quantify uncertainties in research areas like that. Those two R&D priorities mentioned above apply to both land-based and offshore wind. Recognizing offshore has its own uniqueness, another R&D priority is the enabling technologies for offshore wind integration. That includes, but not limited to, offshore and onshore transmission needs, offshore wind plant model and control, hybrid ready offshore plant and hardware in offshore electrical systems. Last but not least is cybersecurity for wind. Our vision is wind energy systems are designed, retrofitted, and operated for resiliency to cyber events, minimizing potential impacts to the energy systems. Let me end this slide with a few notable achievements and some of our current activities. Beyond the one that I already mentioned, the wind farm demonstration in California, we contributed and are part of DOE's $80 million Grid Modernization Lab Consortium. We provided tools for enhancing utilization of transmission infrastructure and developed a new IEEE reliability test system for research communities and system operations. In terms of cybersecurity, we have ongoing projects. One is building on reference models for wind plant communication as a basis for cybersecurity research, and I just started looking into malware detection tools. Both of the two cyber projects are led by Idaho National Labs. We are continually looking to more collaborative efforts throughout DOE offices on grid integration and cyber collaboration. So Bob, turn it back to you. Thanks.
Not sure if Bob's on mute, but maybe we'll just jump right ahead to the last.
No, I'm sorry. I was on mute, and I'm very sorry about that. I started talking without looking at my phone, which had gone black, of course, on a timeout thing. So I apologize. But let's just move straight to our fifth and pillar of 5, data analysis and modeling. And this is the kind of work that truly informs how we shape our portfolio looking to the future and where the opportunities for DOE might be. So let me call again on Patrick to brief on this.
Thanks, Bob. So in the analysis and modeling portfolio, really the goal here is for us to look at the landscape of wind energy and try and figure out what are the most important opportunities that we have for federal investment in R&D to make a difference in terms of our goals of cost reduction and increasing accessibility to wind across the country. We do that through a number of ways. One, we collect a lot of data on cost and performance and technology deployment, both in the United States and globally, so we understand what the state of the technology is currently. We do a lot of both bottoms up and various kinds of top-down assessments, looking at the cost reduction potential of various innovations. So for example, we're doing a lot of work right now on assessing the kind of tall wind tower technologies that Mike spoke about earlier. And once we have an understanding of what the cost reduction potentials for those technologies are, we can then go through and look at those in the context of the other innovations that we're considering and ask the question, so what? If we're successful in making these innovations happen and getting them to deploy into the marketplace, what will that mean for the future of wind in the US? And so the final piece that we do is we run a wide variety of future-looking scenario analyses, assessing what the impacts of innovation can be on both wind's role in the electricity sector and in the electricity sector more broadly, and those are represented by these charts on the right. So if we can achieve that, looking at the upper right-hand chart, the A2E in quote scenario, it stands for atmosphere to electrons, looking at the wind plant optimization work Mike Derby talked about earlier. If we can achieve the goals of that program and get wind down to a cost more than 50% lower than it was in 2015 by 2030, then we can realize the kinds of deployment that we see in the bottom right chart, which we get through assessment in our capacity expansion models, As you can see, compared to any of those other scenarios, if we're able to achieve our goals there, we can make a substantial difference in the amount of wind deployed, and that helps us understand what innovations are most likely to help move that curve such that we can see a greater amount of wind deployed in the United States. Bob, I'll hand it back to you then.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Let me go on then to, that's our fifth pillar, and we're going to be taking questions in a moment. But let me go on to the last slide, which is maybe not a central pillar in our R&D program, but certainly something that's cross-cutting, and it's very important. Not all of DOE's wind program is focused exclusively on research and development. We also seek to nurture a skilled workforce to meet and build out the demands of wind in the future, and on land and on shore. And I call on Jocelyn Brown Saraceno to give us an update on our programs here.
Great, thanks, Bob. So as Bob provided a quick overview, we do work within this space to really make sure that we're doing our due diligence to make sure that there is a future wind workforce that's available to meet the needs of the growing industry in both a land-based and an offshore context. And in this area, we both support national scale analyses to really help us understand future and current workforce development needs and gaps. We serve as a convener of educational programs and industry to really try to identify solutions to gaps where those gaps have been identified through our analytical efforts. And then we also work to help seed fund or catalyze wind energy programming. And a couple programs of note that may be of interest to the audience. DOE currently supports the Wind for Schools program. This is a program affiliated with both universities and K through 12 organizations, supports the establishment of wind application centers at universities, and those wind application centers in turn work with some of the younger students around integrating wind into the coursework of students, and then also in a number of locations working to help install wind turbines at schools that the students can then utilize the data from. And to date, through the Wind for Schools program, we've supported the installation of 140 small wind turbines and have engaged over 1,300 students. And currently, we're working with the Repowering Schools nonprofit to transition to management of Wind for Schools to that organization for long-term financial and management oversight and moving forward. And then we also lead the Collegiate Wind Competition through our National Renewable Energy Laboratory. For those participants who have attended We as Wind Power conference in the past, you may have seen this in action. This is a competition in which university students design and then build scale models of wind turbines, and then also develop siting and business cases for their turbines, and then test those turbines in a wind tunnel. To date, we've engaged 20 universities in 15 states and Puerto Rico, and have engaged over 900 students in the competition. This year, the schools and the students, as well as NREL, have been really flexible and creative in moving the competition to a virtual format. And so currently, the competition is happening over the next couple weeks in a virtual form. And our hope, though, is that in the future we'll return to having the competition in person at future clean power events, and would encourage folks who do attend those events to come check out the competition, because it's truly inspiring to get to see the ingenuity of these students and their commitment to wind energy education. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Bob.
All right, thank you, Jocelyn. Yeah, this is a really fun program. When you see the pictures of the students all on their teams competing. I am not on mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm not on mute. I have to keep touching my phone so it doesn't go black, otherwise hiding the mute button, but I'm definitely talking now. Anyway, this is a great program, and we're going to continue that. We're going into a new cycle here shortly. So this is what we have in terms of our formal presentation. Let's click to the last slide, which is thanking everybody for their time and attention with some very important web access information here. Is that one is to the website for our program on wind energy at DOE and our laboratories, and another one is a newsletter which comes out rather frequently, routinely, with an awful lot of updates and links to what's going on in the wind industry, particularly the kinds of announcements that we have on our competitive solicitations and other things. So happy to take questions now, and we'll just kind of farm them out here as that they come in. Maybe I can answer some, or maybe we can refer them to our program managers, our technical program managers. So do we have a moderator who's going to be asking questions?
Yes, hi, this is Kirsten from NASEO. I'll be moderating the questions. Just a reminder to the audience that you can type in your questions into the chat box, and we'll read them out loud and answer the questions. So we got a few questions in already, and I wanted to start by asking Bob, if you could maybe elaborate how state energy offices can cooperate with the wind office, how they can benefit from the expertise, and how they can support what the wind office is doing.
Yeah, so we're really interested in knowing what's going on in your states and trying to stay informed. And we do have a relationship with the NASEO headquarters here in Washington, and I believe I've met with a number of folks on a regular basis with NASEO. So that's one channel, is to basically focus them into the National Association, and then have regular meetings between us. But at the same time, is that you're certainly welcome to contact us directly in the Department of Energy, and or go to our national laboratories, many of which are located around the country, and you probably know where they are, and you can reach out for technical assistance there. We want to be helpful. I mean, it's clearly a partnership between the federal government and the states in basically setting the proper innovation landscape for wind to succeed. There are lots of issues that we need to address, and we want to be on target and focusing on the right things. Also, you can, I just mentioned this, of course, you know this anyway, but you're, of course, welcome to work through your state delegations, to the Senate and the House. And we hear regularly from the folks on the Hill who write our appropriations and give us rather clear direction sometimes in our language about what it is we're supposed to do. So that's another way. But let me ask Mike and others just to join in voluntarily here on other ideas on how states can work with us. And also I mentioned, because Deanna is kind of a host here, is that working through EPRI, we have a lot of collaborations with EPRI, particularly on the technology front. So that's another way. So any of us on the team here would like to answer that question?
This is Mike. I would like to just highlight the fact that the National Offshore Wind Consortium that DOE is helping fund is open to anybody for participation. And in fact, several states have already joined the consortium and are providing funding actually for research that DOE is supporting as well. So I think that's a good avenue for states to get involved with offshore wind in particular.
Yeah, that's a really great suggestion. And once you're a member of the consortium, of course, you would participate in the R&D committee and how to shape the priorities for the funding that is there. I mean, it comes in part from DOE and in part from the states, but it's the selections are competitive, and the solicitations are organized along priorities that are shaped by the advice we get from the R&D committee. Anybody
Great,
else?
thank you so much.
Patrick, anything on maybe the distributed wind side, or? Hearing none, then we will go to another question.
Great, thank you. This is really helpful. We had a question maybe for Mike. Do you anticipate any delays for the offshore wind projects due to COVID-19?
Yeah, we have heard that many projects are going to be delayed. And some of the factors are applied to working with supply chains, and others with some of the permitting process, the ability to collect field data and such. Our own projects, we've had several that have had impacts, and we're expecting up to a year's delay on some of those. You know, how things go over the next few months is probably going to be real important to the overall impact, but some of the activities have to occur in a certain time window, and the inability to get some of those activities underway this year is going to necessitate a one-year delay. You know, industry's also been looking to get an extension to some of the deadlines for construction starts and the production tax credits. I know that there's support for that in Congress, but I don't believe it's been passed yet.
Yeah, so we're keeping track of this, and the leadership of DOE has asked for input directly from all of our activities and our partners, so whether they be national laboratories or otherwise, on the kind of impacts that they're experiencing. Clearly, when you can't mobilize some of the stuff, particularly some of the work that has to go on in the field, you can tolerate some delays, but you know, some are timed to weather windows or seasonal windows and other things. So we do expect delays, and there could be some cost implications as well. So obviously, we're going to try to cope the best we can. It's a good question, and we will have impacts.
Thank you. It's really helpful. And I guess there's one last question that came in. I guess this would be for Elon. I think you already mentioned the Department of Energy's Energy Storage Grand Challenge, and that the Wind Office is collaborating with that effort. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more what you see the Wind Office playing a role in this grant energy storage Grand Challenge?
Jian?
Oh yeah, I'm here. Yeah. The system integration program started looking into how wind and the battery can better provide grid services. I think maybe 3 years ago. We also have a new grid modernization project looking into wind with solar and with hydrogen and fuel cell. All of those projects directly contribute to the energy storage Grand Challenge. DOE's effort of Grand Energy Storage Challenge is still ongoing. I think they actually have several workshops ongoing, and we are actively engaging with other offices through this venue for future R&D opportunities in this area. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. That's really helpful. That's all the questions I received. I don't know if you, Bob, want to have any final remarks, or any of the program managers?
Well, I would just like to thank NASEO one more time, you know, for giving us an opportunity to share what it is that we're doing at the Department of Energy on behalf of wind technology, the industry, and all the users, we're very grateful for the very important role that states play in facilitating the deployment of wind, and I know that many of your citizens are enjoying the benefits of it, and we'd like to see more. So, and we're very happy to work with any and all. So I've given some clues as to how to come to us, but I think probably probably the most effective in terms of might be through NASEO or contacting us directly, and we'll try to be as responsive as we can. So thanks one last time to NASEO for providing the opportunity and hosting the platform, and thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Bob. And I would like to thank the Wind Energy Office from NASEO, as well as Dennis from EPRI for moderating and for the great presentations. NASEO will, of course, support the Wind Energy Office going forward. And if there are any questions from any of the states that were on the line, we will be happy to facilitate the ongoing conversation. And with that, we will ending the webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Deanna. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.